This man murdered 2 women.
Can you state your full name for me, please?
Levi Bellfield.
He attempted to kill a 3rd.
The crush of bones, I just felt completely crushed, like as if you were in a vice.
And is probably responsible for a further 30 attacks.
Have you ever stood in the kitchen and actually physically wet yourself with fear when you've heard the key, like heard him come through the door, because you don't know if you're going to get the shit kicked out of you?
For years, he avoided detection, but he couldn't avoid the cameras.
We're used to seeing the seedy side of life, but this was something beyond what we were used to.
Tonight, we tell the remarkable story of the police investigation that proved one man was behind it all. The night of the 19th of August 2004, and 22-year-old French student Amélie Delagrange is walking home. Just minutes later, she was brutally murdered.
I got a phone call at home to say there's a new investigation. A young French girl who's been battered about the head on Twickenham Green, and get into Twickenham as soon as you can with your team. My team cover most of West London and Central London, and we're not used to operating in this sort of area. It's the last place that you would expect to find a savage murder of a young girl just walking home.
At 22:15, Amélie was found unconscious by a cricket green in southwest London.
This is the spot where Amélie was found. Local man was taking a walk round the park, round the green here, just to get some air in the evening, and he came across her lying here. She had a terrible, terrible head injury, very severe wound at the back of her head, probably inflicted by something heavy, blunt, like a hammer. The police and ambulance arrived. The ambulance crew treated her here, bandaged her head quite extensively, took her away to hospital, but unfortunately she died some 15 minutes later.
Amélie was born just outside Paris in 1982 and came to London aged 19. She worked at a French patisserie in Richmond and lived in a bedsit close to Twickenham Green.
2 policiers sont venus et nous ont appris.
2 officers came and broke the news to us that Amélie had been attacked in Twickenham and that she had died.
Ça a été un choc terrible.
It was a terrible shock because we could not believe it. I ran to her bedroom to fetch a photograph of her, to say that it was impossible, that Amélie had gone to England, that she would be coming back.
When Amélie was found at 22:15, her bags were missing. Whoever killed her also took her mobile phone.
The first real lead we had was when the mobile phone company told us that her mobile phone was last visible on their network in the area of Walton Bridge. I knew from my time on the river, both as a child and recently, that this was the most likely place in the area of Walton Bridge where somebody could dispose of something in the river. The divers went down for their first dive for 30 minutes and found nothing. They went for their second dive, and within 10 minutes they found a purse, a CD Walkman, and some keys with a key fob. We weren't sure, obviously, that the purse nor the Walkman was hers, but the good fortune we had was that the keyring actually had a photograph of Amélie on the fob of the keyring. So immediately we were aware that what we'd found were Amélie's belongings.
Her mobile phone was thrown into the water 18 minutes after Amélie was attacked on the green. In order to travel the 8 miles to Walton Bridge in that time, the killer must have used a vehicle.
And that gave us a greater impetus to go back to the closed-circuit television around Twickenham Green to look at the vehicles there, because from that point we knew that one of those vehicles would have to have our killer inside it.
Immediately after Amélie's murder, a police station was set up on Twickenham Green to appeal to the public for help. This revealed a world of hidden domestic violence.
There were a large number of women who had phoned about their boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, husbands, ex-husbands, saying they thought he was violent, unfortunately that's quite common, and that he was capable of doing these things. There were in fact 129 separate men that were suggested in this way to us, and one of those was Levi Bellfield.
He's got all the, like, the chat, all the, you know, talk and everything. He can, like, sweet talk anyone. He moved in almost straight away. And sort of the first time he stayed, he never went.
First few weeks, he painted a brilliant picture. He was charming, he was polite, very softly spoken. But after a few weeks of my friend seeing him, I noticed a different side to him.
Have you ever stood in a kitchen and actually physically wet yourself with fear when you've heard the key, like, heard him come through the door, because you don't know if you're going to get the shit kicked out of you or if he's going to be really nice. You don't know. Every day was a battle to survive with him. He does what he wants when he wants. And if anyone, like, dares to say anything or go against him, you just got beaten and beaten, raped, abused, everything.
Levi Bellfield was born on the 17th of May 1968 in Isleworth, southwest London. He left school when he was 16 and started work as a mechanic. He quickly moved into the security business, first as a doorman, and then he ran his own clamping business, often illegally. Bellfield's criminality was known to the police as early as 1982, when he was convicted of burglary and theft. Over the next 20 years, he carried out further offences involving possession of weapons, drugs, rape, threats to kill, and violent assaults.
I don't think there's a lot of evidence that you get a very specific trigger that sets off a particular act of violence. What you have is an individual in a state where they will draw on violence to achieve certain objectives in their life. Then from that, he can move on to attack strangers because of a generalised feeling that he needs somehow or other to express that inner turmoil and anger.
5 days into the investigation, Bellfield's name entered the inquiry, and the murder team began to look back at other unsolved attacks with a similar profile. Police found 5 all within a few miles of each other. Were they connected? The first happened in Whitton. 17-year-old Spanish-born Ana Maria Rennie was walking alone late at night after an argument with her boyfriend.
I became aware of a car which had pulled in. I remember a man getting out of the passenger side and walked towards me. I continued walking, but he must have said something to me because I know that I stopped and ended up having a conversation with him. We both then walked back towards the car. I remember saying to the driver something about his car being a Ford Mondeo. It was dark blue.
That's my mate.
Hey.
Come on.
The next thing I remember, the man I had told to grabbed me. His right hand was firmly over my mouth. He was trying to get me back towards the car, and I was absolutely petrified. I was struggling and kicking as hard as I could. He released his grip on me.
Anna, traumatized by the attack, returned to Spain to live. 4 years later, DCI Colin Sutton flew Anna back to London. She then positively identified Levi Bellfield as the man who had tried to kidnap her. Bellfield was now moving up the list of potential suspects for Amelie's murder. But with the lack of any forensic evidence, they were still unable to prove it was him. All they knew was that her killer must have used a vehicle and must have been caught on camera.
The quantity of CCTV that came in was huge. I would say somewhere in the region of 200-300 hours, potentially. It was footage mainly from bus CCTV. We had a bit of footage from a Bravida traffic car, which is a police-marked traffic car. I decided to go through the stills just to give myself an idea of movement of people and vehicles around the green on the time that Amelie was walking across it.
The CCTV allowed police to accurately piece together Amelie's final 30 minutes alive. Amelie had been drinking with friends in a Twickenham wine bar and left to catch a bus home at 21:30. She got on a 267 bus at 21:39, and CCTV shows her wearing a t-shirt and carrying a shopping bag. The bus stopped at the green where she would normally get off, and whether she was disorientated through having too much to drink, we'll never know. But we do know through the CCTV that she stayed on the bus until it terminated at Fulwell Bus Garage at 21:45.
We can see on the CCTV Amelie has a conversation with the driver that we know she's saying, when's the next bus? And it was about 15 minutes, so she obviously faithfully decided to walk back up.
A passing police car equipped with a camera captured this footage of Amelie on Hampton Road. Five weeks into Amelie's investigation, the footage revealed a vital clue.
I walked past the CCTV room one morning and DC Paul McGough said, "Governor, come in, I need to show you something."
Going through the stills, I came across some images of a white van parked near the green. That became a focal point for me, and as I kept going through, this image kept coming back.
At 21:32, approximately 45 minutes before Amelie's attack, the white van is caught on camera in Staines Road, going east. 10 minutes later, the white van is seen turning off Staines Road into Fifth Cross Road. Then, a minute before 10, it's seen in Hampton Road, going towards Twickenham Green. Pubs and restaurants border the north side of the green. Houses run along the quieter south side. And it was here, in a lay-by, minutes before Amelie was murdered, that the white van pulled in.
So the footage here shows of the van at the green. It's first picked up at 22:05. That's the first stills that we get.
She's bang on the time.
It is, yeah.
It was very suspicious, not just the fact that it was sitting there at the very time Amelie must have been murdered, but why would a van like that be driving around this mostly residential area for the best part of 3/4 of an hour, up and down roads? And that added to the suspicion because it wasn't only there at the time, but was behaving in a way which looked predatory.
From CCTV images, experts were able to identify the white van as a Ford Courier with several distinguishing features. It had a broken near-side headlight and its rear windows were painted white. Moments after the attack, a cyclist reported being overtaken by a white van driving at a crazy speed. The van he saw had distinctive alloy plates riveted to the bottom of the rear doors. It was speeding south towards Walton, where Amelie's possessions were found.
It was when all those pieces came together that I took the decision that really the van was going to be our #1 priority. We had to find that van.
Just 3 miles from Twickenham Green, police had another unsolved murder, that of 19-year-old Marsha McDonnell.
Marsha McDonnell from Hampton in southwest London was attacked with a blunt instrument as she returned from a night out with friends.
Attacks like that on women by strangers in the street are extremely rare. They just don't happen all that often. And in such a small area, there was obviously going to be a potential link between them.
I wouldn't leave your party so soon.
It's so exciting. She just seems such a happy person. No matter what mood you're in, she'd automatically bring you up. You'd be really happy. She's lovely.
Yeah, he did it lovely in the shade of blue.
I was a bit worried about leaving Marsha on her own because I knew our bus was coming before. So I just said to her, leave your phone in your pocket and give me a ring when you got home. And the bus pretty much came, and me and Tasha both got on that.
Marsha boarded her bus at 8 minutes past midnight. CCTV images on the lower deck captured her journey home. "17 minutes later, Marsha is seen getting off the bus a short distance from her house.
What we find with a serial offender who carries on for so long is that they will become aware of the opportunities in their surroundings. So they'll be moving towards these locations, observing and watching until they find an opportunity where all the various possibilities come together. It's the right sort of victim in the right sort of location at the right point of time, and then they will attack.
Moments later, neighbours asleep were woken by a loud thump. They found Marcia lying on the pavement outside. She'd been hit with a hammer-like weapon on the back of her head and died nearly 2 days later of severe brain injury. No one saw her killer. The murder team had to reinvestigate Marcia's case, and again it was the bus CCTV images that provided the clues.
I had a group of people whose expertise in looking at closed-circuit television, particularly from buses, was probably unrivalled anywhere in the country because they'd just simply looked at so much of it. And they'd evolved techniques that are blindingly obvious when you think of them, but we hadn't done before. And that's simply this, that you take CCTV from inside a bus and you tend to look at what's going on in the bus, who's sitting there, might they be witnesses, where's the victim on the bus. But actually, all the time, you're seeing what's going on outside the bus.
And the images from the cameras mounted inside the bus showed through its windows a silver Vauxhall Corsa targeting the bus as it dropped Marcia off.
We saw what it was doing after it went past the bus, and we saw it sitting at the crossroads, waiting for Marcia to see which way she went. The trouble was we couldn't quite read the registration number of this car, and it was tantalising because you sometimes thought you could see some figures in it and sometimes not.
At the time, Bellfield owned this silver Vauxhall Corsa and was seen driving the car 6 days before Marcia was attacked. Its registration number was Y57RJU. The team's next move was to show the CCTV images of the Vauxhall to imagery experts to see if they could identify the number plate. The experts came back with a staggering 600,000 possibilities.
By a mammoth piece of detective work and analysis, we were able to distill that eventually down to 294 cars. And we spoke with 289 people who said, my car wasn't in Hampton. There were 4 we couldn't trace the owners, and the other one was Levi Bellfield's.
It's not something that starts off as a determination to go out and kill. It starts off with learning that some sort of feeling of achievement or self-worth or power is generated by physical aggression. It's very much about women as particular vehicles, as representatives of targets that he feels he needs to attack and to aggressively destroy.
I was in the garage and I can't even remember what I was looking for, but Levi had a lot of tools and bits and pieces in the garage, and there was like a bin liner and it was sort of wedged in like one of the big shelves. When I went through it, there was a balaclava, big carving knife, like a sort of bread knife carving knife, and there was a magazine. Even some of the pages, the corners have been turned over, and some of the Pacific pages where the corners have been turned over, they're all like blondes, and he'd stabbed all the faces.
He seemed to have this sort of almost stereotypical notion of the typical woman as the slim young blonde. He would begin to pick on them and see them as individuals that really just represented a sort of vehicle for him to act out his anger and his determination to have that sort of power.
The more police investigated Bellfield's world, the more terrifying it had become. They heard stories of horrific attacks on women and sudden explosive violence on anyone who got in his way.
Anything violent, he loved. Anything, whether it was dog fighting, bare knuckle fighting, anything that had a form of violence, you know, a programme with an animal's head being ripped off, you know, he'd love it. More violent, the more blood, guts, the better.
Bellfield confessed to his partner that he hated women, and went out looking for them close to where they lived.
Just sat down on the bed and started crying and saying about, it was, you know, how much he hated women and he'd been going out 2-3 times a week. I said, what do you mean going out? And he said, down the alleyway behind the house. So when the trains come in from London, sort of from 6-7 o'clock at night, he was going down there wearing the coat. The inside left pocket was cut out. So if you looked at someone walking down the road, you'd think it's winter, he's got a big warm coat on with a hat, and his hands are in his pocket. You wouldn't think anything else, but what he's actually doing was holding a knife.
6 days after Amelie's murder, Bellfield was taken to a hospital by a friend who'd found him crying and very distraught. Bellfield's then girlfriend confirmed that he was having suicidal thoughts and was planning to hang himself.
Sometimes these sorts of offenders, once it's all over, once the release of tension is gone, they then feel very depressed and confused and upset about what they're doing, and will express that almost as a concern about themselves, not really remorse, but a concern about who they are and what they're doing. But it quickly passes, and then the tension builds up again.
The inquiry team then uncovered another attack on a woman in Longford village, just a few miles from where Marcia and Amelie were murdered. Again, it bore clear similarities. In December 2003, 34-year-old Albanian-born Irma Dragoshi was waiting to catch the bus home.
It was dark. I gave her a call, and because I was worried.
Hello?
At the time, Bellfield was driving past with a colleague.
Sick people, you know, sick. The man who does these things, yeah, is not human being.
Irma was hit over the back of the head with a blunt instrument and ended up in hospital. Although she recovered, she was left with amnesia and returned to her home country shortly afterwards. When Colin's team interviewed Bellfield, he said he was there, but blamed his colleague.
The lady was standing at the bus stop. He got out the back driver's door, walked over, and what way was an egg crate, all of a sudden he started pulling at her handbag. I thought he's mad. And I drove off and left him. And then, as I said, we got to the width restriction. When I got to the width restriction, I had to slow down because there's buses coming. It's like a little bridge there. And he must have run about 80 yards, 100 yards, and he was out of breath. Couldn't even breathe. He got back in the back of the car. Don't even know whether he took a bag or anything. He got in the back of the car, I was screaming at him. Well, you know, I mean, it's my car, it's registered to my address. So what the fuck are you doing? Just couldn't believe it. I was in disbelief.
I think he had no choice but to do that. We had somebody who was in the car with him who was giving us that evidence and saying, I saw Levi attack this woman. He had to give us a story. He had to make an excuse. And in something that's quite a common thing with Levi Bellfield, he deflects it and says, no, it wasn't me, it was him.
The hunt for the Ford Courier van used in Amelie's murder was hotting up. But with as many as 26,000 similar vans identified, the team was drowning in numbers.
We realised that a lot of these vans may actually have been registered to companies way outside of London, but were being used in London. So I then had members of the murder squad standing on footbridges over the A316 in the freezing cold, from 6 in the morning till 2 in the morning, effectively taking car numbers. We were just scratching the surface. So we effectively split the entire country up into postcodes and sent pairs of officers out away from London, really with the instructions, don't come back until you've looked at all these vans in your area.
At the same time, a team focused on the 129 names provided by the public as suspects to see if any of them had any connection with a white Ford Courier van. Levi Bellfield had such a van, and what's more, had amassed a string of parking and speeding offences whilst driving it. Here, Bellfield is caught driving illegally in a Twickenham bus lane, just 2 days before Amelie's murder.
We were able to obtain a number of images of the van which showed us that it had the checker plates, the whited out windows, confirming to us really that, yes, this was really likely to be the van we were looking for.
The number of past attacks that had close similarities to that of Amelie's was growing, but not all of them involved a blunt, hammer-like weapon. One in particular seemed to exemplify the barbaric nature of the attacker. On the 27th of May 2004, 18-year-old Kate Sheedy had been out celebrating the last day of school with her friends in Twickenham. She left them just after midnight and caught a bus home to Isleworth.
It was about sort of after 12 at night, but it was still quite busy. A few people had got off before at the stop, but at the stop I got off, I was the only person. Straight away I was getting sort of my phone and my keys out of my handbag, and I started to walk home. I saw a vehicle parked up on the side of the road. The first thing that sort of brought my attention to it was I heard the car engine running, but I couldn't see any lights on, which I thought was a little bit strange. I don't know, I just got a very bad feeling from it, so I crossed the road. I had kind of images of girls being pulled into the back of a car, you know, that sort of thing sort of was flashing through my head, and I just kind of kept on walking, but kept my head down. Just thought, mate, if they don't notice me, then, you know, it'll be okay. I thought maybe it's just going to drive off, but then as it didn't sort of straighten up, I definitely realised at that stage that he was trying to deliberately run me over. I do remember feeling the impact, just being completely winded. When it first hit me, just I don't even know if I made any sound. I think barely, kind of maybe a shriek came out. The wheel then went over my back. It was horrible, sort of the crush of bones. I just felt completely crushed, like as if you were in a vice. I was just terrified. And then they reversed back over me. Started to crawl towards home. I was determined that I was going to get home. Wasn't just going to roll over and die.
And where does it hurt?
Everywhere. The car stopped and took me out.
Yeah.
But me again. He just ran over me.
He ran over you again?
Yeah.
So he ran over you twice?
Yeah. And I really hurt.
The first day I woke up and knew exactly what was going on. I think just frightened. I couldn't move, I couldn't walk. I had a punctured lung and a collapsed lung, several broken ribs. The most serious injury was my liver. It was both crushed and fractured, so it wasn't functioning. Until my liver popped back up, I was dying. And if that hadn't happened, I was very lucky.
Miraculously, Kate managed to survive and make a good recovery from her injuries and is now in her graduate year at university.
I knew I was going to die if I didn't do something. You know, that motivates you to enjoy life. You know, I really do try and enjoy myself. I have a great time at university. Try and get away lots, do fun things, and you've got to make the most of things that made you realise how fragile life is.
Despite her injuries, Kate managed to describe the vehicle that ran over her as a white people carrier with blacked-out windows. She also noticed the driver's wing mirror was broken, but detectives still needed more evidence. They got it through a stroke of luck. It turned out the original investigation had missed a vital clue.
The borough officers investigating it made a simple error. They failed to notice that there were two lots of CCTV tapes, viewed one and found nothing of any use, but actually didn't view the other tapes. And this wasn't noticed until we took the investigation over and took all the exhibits and found these tapes that hadn't been looked at. And it showed us exactly what happened.
The CCTV was from cameras on the County Arms pub, close to where Kate was run over. It clearly shows a white people carrier following Kate's bus.
We were able to see it following the bus that Kate was on, and then pulling off into a side road, into the mouth of a side road, and waiting, lying in wait, again waiting to see what Kate did. I believe Levi had seen Kate on the bus, waiting to get off, and he wanted to see which way she went in the road. Within a minute and a half, the Toyota is seen speeding back in the opposite direction whence it came.
Whilst investigating Amelie's case, the murder team uncovered many vehicles linked to Bellfield.
That's interesting.
One was this Toyota Previa that fitted Kate's description, even down to the broken wing mirror.
What chance did she have, mate? What chance did she have?
No comment.
No chance at all. Size of that gun over her. Not once, twice. Leaving her for dead.
No comment.
18 years old.
No comment.
Yeah? Like that. Because something's gone in Levi's head. That's what's happened,
No
mate.
comment.
It is. It is. Too many similarities, Levi. Too many similarities for the question not to be asked and for you not to say why.
No comment.
No comment. Because you can't say anything, can you?
The investigation team now had 5 attacks that pointed to Bellfield. The net was closing in. Convincing CCTV evidence showed his van was involved in Amelie's murder, but there was one more vital clue that was to place Bellfield himself at the crime scene.
We spoke to Levi's current partner of some 10 years, and she told us that she remembered going to Tesco's at Hayes on the evening of the 19th of August. And she remembers phoning Levi and asking him to come and pick her up, which he did. And she then remembers him taking her back home in the white Ford Courier van till at exactly 9 o'clock and then driving off. What happened then was that she, for some reason, decided to phone Levi at about 20 to 10. And that showed us from the phone record subsequently that at that time, his phone was in the area of Twickenham Green. Once we put that piece of information together with the CCTV sightings and the timings on those, we really had the 3 elements together. We knew Levi was there, we knew he had his mobile phone, and we knew he was in possession of the van.
Nothing prepares you to survive the death of your child. If she had been sick, we would perhaps have been prepared. But here, it is so violent that you just cannot accept it. Everybody refused to believe that Amélie was gone forever, that we would not see her ever again. It is so inconceivable that someone could die so young and in such circumstances, such frightful circumstances. We will never recover from this. We will be in mourning to the end of our days.
Did you kill Emily? Did you? Did you kill her, Levi? Did you? See, because I said to you, didn't I, we've reached a line where all this similar stuff's coming up, isn't it? Blondes, buses, Levi's cars. Yeah? So maybe we've reached a line till we say why. Why did you do it?
People say, well, why didn't you tell the police? So, well, you have your kids and you tell me, and you live what we've lived through with him, if you're brave enough to go to the old Bill, because it doesn't happen like that. And I have to live with guilt for the rest of my life, knowing that maybe I could have stopped him years ago when he's told me things that he's done. But like I said at the time, there was never enough evidence or people that would come forward because they're still scared.
On the 22nd of November 2004, Levi Bellfield was arrested as the prime suspect for Amelie's murder. Bellfield's time was up, but he wasn't about to hand himself in.
We thought he was at his home address in West Drayton. The officers went in there and it seemed he wasn't there, so we didn't know where he was. And there followed a couple of hours of frantic activity going around to other places where we thought he might be, because obviously the cat was out of the bag now that we were looking for him, and we thought we might lose him. I then received a phone call from one of my sergeants who was back at the home address and said, we've actually been told that he's in the loft. Which gave me a massive problem, because how do you get the man who you're trying to arrest for battering people about the head out of a loft safely? Because the first thing you have to do is climb up the ladder, open the hatch and pop your head through, and of course that's going to be a very dangerous moment. I get another phone call from this very experienced old sergeant who says, don't worry, Governor, I've got him. And Levi was arrested, hiding naked in the loft under the insulation.
2 weeks ago at the Old Bailey, Levi Bellfield was found guilty of the murders of Amélie Delagrange and Marcia MacDonald, and the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy. The judge told Bellfield that he would never be considered for parole and must spend the rest of his life in prison. But the story doesn't end here. On the 21st of March 2002, 13-year-old Millie Dowler was abducted close to her home in Walton-on-Thames. Her body was found 6 months later in Yakeley Heath Woods in Hampshire. Millie had been brutally murdered. Levi Bellfield lived directly opposite the site where Millie went missing. This red car, potentially involved in the abduction, was caught on camera, pulling out of Bellfield's road that same afternoon. Bellfield's then partner owned a red Daewoo Nexia. Was this Levi Bellfield? Was Millie inside the car? That investigation is ongoing.